Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Julie Menders. Thank you for joining us today. I'm the Adult Programming Coordinator here at Otis Library. April is Harris Sisters Month here at Otis Library, where we recognize the courage and the achievements of Norwich natives, Sarah and Mary Harris. The sisters were among the first Black students at the Prudence Crandall's Canterbury School. We're going to be joined today by Professor Barbara M. Tucker, and she's going to be giving a talk on the other Harris sisters. I'd like to thank all of the volunteers who helped us create Harris Sisters Month here at Otis Library, including Alana Sherman, who actually thought of this initiative. And we've been doing this for about 14 years now here at Otis Library. So it's pretty incredible. And we're very grateful to the Harris Sisters Month Committee for helping us to create important programming around this theme each year. So again, today's program is The Other Harris Sisters, looking at the lives of Olive, Celinda, Jane, and Abby. And it is presented by Professor Barbara M. Tucker, the Emeritus Professor of History and Director of the Center for Connecticut Studies at Eastern Connecticut State University. She received her Ph.D. from the University of California at Davis. Her books include Samuel Slater and the Origins of the American Textile Industry, and the book Industrializing Antebellum America, written with Kenneth Tucker. The latter contains an extensive discussion of John Fox Slater of Norwich. That's a name that I'm sure sounds very familiar to many of us here in Norwich. Additionally, she has published many articles on pre-Civil War New England. So I'd like to welcome Professor Tucker here, and thank you all for joining us, and thank you, Barbara.
Hello, I'm Barbara Tucker, and first of all, what I'd like to do is tell you people in Norwich how fortunate you are. You are at the center of history during the antebellum period in southern New England. And of course, you know about Prudence Crandall, but in nearby Hampton, Massachusetts, we had Theodore Weld, and he wrote Slavery as It Is, and he married one of the most notable of all abolitionists, Angelina Grimke. You also have Samuel May here as well. And for those of you who are interested in him, his papers are at Cornell and they're online, so you can look at those there. You have perhaps one of the most important churches in southern New England, the Second Congregational Church. This is where the Harrises went. This is where David Ruggles, another famous abolitionist, went. This was the home church of John Fox Slater and others. And as you know, John Fox Slater is so very vital. He was a manufacturer, but he was also a philanthropist. You, of course, know his connection with Norwich Free Academy. And black and white, male and female, rich and poor. How far ahead of his time was that? And then after the war, he was one of the top philanthropists in the country. The John Fox Slater Fund gave $1 million for the education of Southern Black slaves. And so you are so rich in history of this period. And so you should just enjoy all of that, as well as the first Republican governor during the Civil War is from Norwich. Before I start on the Harris sisters, I just want to give a little bit of context for the era here. Southern New England, especially, United States as a whole, but Southern New England is undergoing tremendous change during this period. It's very volatile. We're moving from an agricultural rural society to an industrial one dominated by the factory. That has so many implications here for people in this area. Also, the whaling industry was resurrected during this period. All of this is going to impact, all of this is the environment for Prudence Crandall and the Harris family. And especially with industrialization, how do people adjust from task labor to time labor? You do everything according to the clock. Now we don't even question it. We just do everything according to the clock. You got up at a certain time, you had to be at the factory at a certain time, you had to have your meals, and so forth. And this is the environment, as well as growing urbanization. And with urbanization comes disease, and this affects everyone. Doesn't matter if you're in Canterbury or Norwich. This is a period in which typhoid, cholera infantum were rampant. In textile towns, the average age of death for a woman was 27. The Harris sisters are going to outlive everybody. So let me just start with them. And there were, in my research, so many surprises that I found in dealing with the Harris family. At Eastern, I just looked in the library card catalog, and on Prudence Crandall, our state heroine, of course, is voluminous. There were 1,829 entries on her alone. And the Harris family has also been well studied, especially the two older ones, Mary and Sarah. And including Mary, I don't know if people are familiar with this, but this is just a child's book. I would think it's probably 3rd to 5th or 6th grade. And it's The Education of Mary, A Little Miss of Color, 1832. And so a lot of work has been done on the Harris sisters. But they were not the only girls in the family. William and Sally Harris had 12 kids, 9 of whom survived beyond the age of 25 here. And many of them grew up in the Canterbury area, but only one stayed, and that was Olive, and I'll talk more about her shortly. But let me begin with the father. Here, William Monteflora Harris. Now, many of you are probably familiar with the book, Black Roots in Southeastern Connecticut, and it does give a brief history or genealogical survey of the Harris family, and it says that he was born in Barbados. So here, let's start. So I was able to find March 21st, 1783, in Barbados at St. Peter's Church, which is the Church of England, a register of births and christenings. And lo and behold, there was William Harris. What I wasn't prepared for, however, is that there was a designation next to these children. Some said slave, others said colored, and then the rest were white. And lo and behold, there was nothing by William Harris's name, which indicated that, was he white? Well, what a way to start your research. And so, all right, well, the next time he comes into view is when he is in New London here. And just by guess and by golly, he might have been in a sailor moving into the New London area. And I haven't really been able, there's so many William Harrises to really nail that down. But the next time we find him was in August of 1805. He was 22 years old and he was getting married. And it was St. James Episcopal Church in New London. And the minister's name was Charles Seabury. And he said that he married Betsy Smith and William Harris. And this was in 1805, as I said. This is not a happy marriage. And they got a divorce. Now, who gets a divorce in 1807? Not many people. Divorce was unusual. And if you could not abide one another, you might have gotten a legal separation, or you might have gotten just lived separately. But they got a divorce. And people who got a divorce, I mean, this was just shocking. And one Connecticut commentator said, by far the greater part of divorce in this state proceed from the cruel or treacherous conduct of the husband, which circumstance evinces the necessity of affording more effective support to the feebler sex, end quote. William did not get the divorce. Betsy did not get the divorce. William did. William divorced Betsy for adultery. And this was by the New London Superior Court. It was after 2 years of marriage, he found out, and after 4 years, they were divorced. The divorce decree, bill of divorce, thereby releasing and discharging him from the said Betsy and from all the duties and obligation he is under to her, end quote. Court costs $1. 7 months later, he remarries, and this is Sally Prentice. And she, of all of the people I was trying to investigate, remains the most elusive for me. Was she a former slave? There were quite a few Prentice families, many of them very wealthy and had slaves. Was she a free woman or her family? I don't know. All I know is that they did move to Norwich, Jail Hill area, and they attended that second Congregational church where you had John Fox Slater and where you had David Ruggles and where you had probably Frederick Olney as well here. And it was in their Sabbath school. The Second Congregational Church took over a Sabbath school in 1817. And in it, there were 47 girls, 48 boys, and 41 African Americans integrated, 1817. Norwich, here you go again. Probably learned how to read and write there. They certainly met the wealthiest people in Norwich, John Fox Slater amongst them. And their minister, and they had several, and one of them was the Reverend James Dickinson. And he served a short period, but he helped to organize the local Abolitionist Society in Norwich. And he said, we need such a society to correct and embody public sentiment and cause it to bear against this sin of slavery, end quote. Well, we know that there's a move to Canterbury after this in 1832. And here again, things really become, for me, a little confusing because Sally was able to borrow $900 from a local attorney, J. George Washington Trumbull. He was not the wealthiest of men. $900 is a lot of money in this period, and his total wealth was only $5,000. So he's giving a major portion to a Black woman. And so they do move to Canterbury. They do acquire land, build a house, and they begin to attend the Westminster Congregational Church. And I live about half a mile from the Westminster Congregational Church in Canterbury, so I'm quite familiar with it. And several of their children got married there, including Sarah, Mary, Olive, Charles, Jane, and Celinda. All got married at that particular church. And as I said before, only Olive remained in the area. The question that I have, of course, is what of the other girls? What of Olive? What of Celinda? What of Jane? Jane Elizabeth, I'm sure she'd rather be called. Abby Louisa, and even Maria Crandall. And these are remarkable ladies. And I think you will, and is it Prudence Crandall? Is it the Second Congregational Church? Is it their family? What made them so remarkable, and what made them live forever? Three of them, well, two of them lived past 1900, and one of them died in 1899. Their husbands didn't meet such a nice fate, but that's another story. Well, the most information I was able to find is on Olive Smith Harris Olney, and she was born in Norwich in 1822, and she married Frederick Olney, who was a friend of her brother's, Charles, here. And she met him when she was only 12. And they met at the Prudence Crandall School. Well, Frederick is a very interesting person in and of himself. While they met when she was only 12, they certainly did not marry. But Frederick was a mariner, and he was on several ships. And one thing that runs through him and so much of this family is religion. And with him, one of his first major ships that he was on was the Six Brothers. And this was by the Williams brothers out of Essex. And they were a very religious family. And they allowed religious services to be done aboard ship every Sunday, because that is what the people wanted. That is what the crew wanted. And Frederick Olney was part of that. They were also very much concerned with the Greek Civil War, and they ferried things back and forth. So he is engaged in this philanthropic and moral, if you will, endeavor here. And he left seafaring, and that's when he went probably to Norwich first, and then he went to find his friend Charles Harris. And he ended up going to Prudence Crandall School because he knew that she would be able to put him in touch with Charles Harris. And this is where that famous incident occurred. And he was part and parcel of it. He goes into the school, and then a fire breaks out. What in the world is going on? Frederick Olney and others go and they try to find the source of the fire. And the people in Canterbury just went bananas over this. How had the fire started? Was it intentional? A comment had been observed in a local newspaper that, and I quote, "a determination has been forced to break up the Negro school in Canterbury by some means or other in less than 2 months." William Lloyd Garrison ventured that the fire was likely the work of an incendiary. There was an investigation, state officials, and they charged Frederick Olney. Feloniously, voluntarily, willfully, maliciously, and with force set the fire. He was arrested. I mean, been in Canterbury a day? I mean, I know, well, I won't go into Canterbury. Set the fire. Some of the supporters said Judson and his supporters have been permitted to indulge their suspicions to the utmost and to subject a perfectly innocent man to the mortification and expense of a criminal prosecution because he just happened to be inside of the school. Well, there was a trial in Brooklyn, and he was acquitted. And he got out of town. He left. And there are indications he was in New York and elsewhere. He returned, he lived in Brooklyn. And then he must have remained in close contact, though, with the Harris family, because in June 1844, he married Olive Smith Harris in Norwich, not at the Congregational Church, but in Norwich. But here we go again. All of these unusual little incidents happened. They got married within a month, he shipped out. I mean, they weren't even married a month. And this time he shipped out on a whaler. And we do have his diary of his time on the whaler. And, just reading through it, he hardly ever mentions Olive. Oh, what kind of a marriage is this one going to be? And at this time in maritime activity, being on a whaler was the lowest of the mariner trade. The Hartford Current noted agents resorted to recruiting men who were combinations of penniless, delinquent, or drunk. Others were described as that walking embodiment, rag, fair, patch upon patch, and patch over all, wearing cast-off clothing found at a street market. They're pitiful. They are exemplars of vice and deviance and labeled troublesome material. You had to scrape the bottom of the barrel. And here's Frederick Olney. What in the world is he doing? This was a harsh voyage, long voyage. And I said, well, maybe he's going to get a lot of money. He needs money. And that one fell apart too. I won't go into how mariners on whaling ships are paid. It's called the lay. But I figure he probably made $150. For what? How many months? After 3 weeks of marriage? Well, at least that was his last voyage. And by 1850, Olive and Frederick were in Norwich, and they started their family here. Well, they removed back when he came home to Canterbury. And in the spring of 1855, he acquired several parcels of land from his father-in-law, William. Frederick Olney is going to become one of the wealthiest men in Canterbury. 4 years after that, William Harris dies, but the executor of his will was Frederick Olney. And Frederick Olney and Olive Olney acquired land from him and apparently secured land from the estate. 4 years after his father-in-law died, Frederick Olney went to the Norwich Savings Society and borrowed $150 and purchased more land in Canterbury here. His estate grew. By 1861, he and Olive owned 153 acres of land, valued at $1,967, a dwelling house valued at $500. His net list in Canterbury was over $3,000. He was among the top 3% of wealthy people in Canterbury at the time. He was perhaps less lucky, he and Olive, with their children. Initially, by 1860, they had 4 children: Oliver, Frederica, Jesse, and Frederick. But death really touched Olive and the family. One of their first child, he died at the age of 6 months. Jesse died of a bacterial disease when he was 14. Oliver died in the Civil War. When the Civil War came, he went into the Union Navy, like his dad was a Navy man. And he went into the Union Navy. And 4 months later, off the coast of Florida, while blockading a port, he died. He was 16. You also had another son, Giles, died 3 years after he was born of typhoid fever. Um, Frederick Olney himself died in 1869 of pneumonia. And here's where one sees the resilience of Olive. She could have gone back to Norwich. She could have moved in with one of her sisters, but she didn't. She stayed in Canterbury, stayed on her farm. Now, the family did not continue to prosper as it had under Frederick Olney. But as late as 1880, she had $900 in personal and real estate. And several of her children lived with her. She still lived on the farm. She owned her own house. By 1890, she listed her occupation and that of her daughter as nurse. They considered themselves nurses. Her son, who was 36 at the time, was a house painter. And she died February 1901 of bowel cancer, living in Canterbury. Both she and Frederick are buried in the local cemetery. Wow. Who would have thought a Black family would be amongst the 3% richest people in Canterbury? Well, what about Selinda? Well, she was born in Norwich in 1814, and she also lived a long life. 1899 is when she died. Remember what I said before, the average age of death for women in industrial towns is 27. What are these ladies doing? They're doing something right. And in May 1834, she married William Anderson of New London. And he was a barber by trade. And they left Canterbury. She was married at the Westminster Congregational Church and left Canterbury here for New London. And it's very interesting here is that William Anderson's father was a slave, and his name was Scipio. And he belonged to Guy Richards of New London, who was a property owner. And he lived and had land not only in Connecticut, but Vermont and Pennsylvania. And I saw a list of his assets in 1783. And he listed a Negro man named Scipio in his assets, valued at 60 pounds sterling. And Scipio was, crunched in between a crowbar and an iron stove. So you had an iron stove, you had Scipio, then you had in the listing. Connecticut did not have its first abolitionist law, if you could even call it that, until 1784. And then it was very, very anemic at best. It did not free one single slave, the law of 1784, but promised freedom to the children of slaves when they turned 25. So what is that? How is that emancipation? Well, we lowered it to 21 later. And what they said, the state wanted abolition to proceed in a way consistent with the rights of individuals to their own property. But somehow Scipio was freed, and I found him in a newspaper advertisement. He was a chimney sweep. And William Anderson's mother was a free Black. And William Anderson and Selinda left Canterbury, and they moved to New London, and he set up a barber shop. That was his trade. And like Olive and Frederick, they prospered. Someone has to rewrite Black history in southeastern New England. By 1850, His business proved very successful. His real estate was valued at $1,800. They had 4 children by then: Sarah, Mary, William, and Celinda. His business grew by 1860, $3,000 in movable assets and real estate worth $500. That would be his house. His children had begun to work. Mary, the daughter, became a music teacher. William, another son, became a grocery clerk. But William Anderson died in 1868. I think you want to be the ladies. You don't want to be their husbands. They seem to be checking out rather early here, 1868. But Selinda and her children remained in New London. And in 1870, she was 56. She was labeled a mulatto with $300 in personal estate and real estate at $2,500. That is a lot of money. Her daughter, Sarah, age 35, was a dressmaker. Celinda, 23, was a music teacher, and her son, William, now was a nail maker. She made New London her permanent home and died in 1899. Both became widows at an early age. Olive at 47, Celinda at 54. Well, what about the others? There's, others here. What about Jane Elizabeth? Well, Jane Elizabeth died in 1900. I mean, all these women there. She was married but widowed with no children. And what I found fascinating about her is that she left the area. She ended up in New Bedford, Massachusetts. And she was left a widow after only 5 years of marriage and no children. And one would think perhaps she'd move in with one of her sisters, but she didn't. And she chose to live with her newly married niece, Isabella Fairweather Mitchell. And they're a very interesting family, daughter of Sarah Harris. And she had married Mr. Mitchell, and he was the son of a Scotsman and a Black woman. And they lived in the New Bedford area. And they also did very well. George Mitchell, which was Isabella's husband's name, had assets of $1,000 and more. And Jane Elizabeth lived with them for decades and not with her sisters. Less is known, perhaps, about Abby Louisa Harris and Maria Crandall Harris. We believe that both of them never married. Abby was born in Norwich in 1830 and died there in 1911 of cerebral hemorrhage. She was single her entire life. She was a hairdresser, and she died at the local hospital. The one I was able to find the least on was Maria Crandall. I believe she was born in Canterbury in 36, but I believe she died in 65 in Brooklyn, and I really don't know very much about her. Well, considering the era in which these women lived, they were just outstanding. They were beyond the norm: Black, white, immigrant, native born. None of them became burdens on their town. None of them ended up in almshouses. None of them ended up in poorhouses. What produced these women? What gave them so much and allowed them to survive and prosper? Was it the Prudence Crandall incident? Was it the Harris family influence? Was it the Congregational Church? Luck? All of them are exceptions. And very, very interesting, but so much more work has to be done. This is only the surface of these people, and also so much more has to be done on Black lives in Connecticut during this particular period. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Barbara. That was wonderful. That was wonderful. Do we have any questions for Barbara? You can feel free to put them in the chat, or you can raise your hand.
Yes, I'm sorry. Did somebody else have a question?
No, you can go ahead and go first, Ben.
Okay. I think you muted yourself, Julie. I don't know. Just that the reference to Selinda as a mulatto is interesting, given what you found out about William Harris, possibly, in that because her mother was definitely Black, and it's unusual that she would be identified as mulatto if she didn't have a white ancestor there.
That's true. And I think also some of the others were as well, but it differed with every kind of census. Sometimes they were Black, sometimes they were mulatto. And, that's the records we have, unfortunately, but it's very, very interesting. Nevertheless.
Heather says, thank you. It was a wonderful presentation, Barbara. Just so interesting. Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions?
Well, also not so much a question as a comment. I was so happy to hear you say that, how much more work needs to be done, because for so many years it was just erased. Even I'm thinking of James Mars in his autobiography, saying that he wrote the Born and Sold in Connecticut. He wrote this autobiography because during the Civil War, people would come up to him and say, "Oh, surely there was never any slavery in Connecticut," and that was. So he publishes this right after the Civil War, and that he had been born into slavery in Connecticut and sold. And
Smith too.
Yes.
And David Ruggles. I mean, all of them. And no one's connecting all these people.
Yeah, that the people themselves and their contemporaries who were denying the reality of slavery in Connecticut, which is an attitude that has continued to the present day. I'm sure you've found it doing library talks or other more informal talks. I certainly have. That there'll always be someone saying, "Well, where did you find this out? I'm sure there was nothing like this," or things like that.
Well, we have such a pure past, as you know. Are there any other questions?
Well, I just want to thank you so much for joining us today, Barbara. This was just so interesting, and we're so fortunate to have these brilliant people around us who are unearthing these stories. Like you said, Faye, so much of this has been just swept under the rug, and the stories just haven't been told. And that's one of the reasons why we were so passionate about celebrating the Harris sisters and the story of the Prudence Crandall School and all of the ancestors, because more and more information is being unearthed at all times. We have a nice little comment here from Elise. So much interesting information. Thank you. Yes, thank you, Barbara. Any last minute comments? Any last minute questions before we sign off?
Are you planning to publish this somewhere, or is it part of an ongoing project?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the first part.
Oh, do you have plans to publish this somewhere, or is it part of an ongoing project of yours?
Well, it is now, because I had to do so much original research for this. It's got to be published now.
Yes.
But I still have a lot more I need to unearth. I need to connect a lot more and to put them into a context. And I really want to know what was the Black community in this area? How successful were they? Not everyone could be like this, certainly. So this is the beginning of a project and certainly not the end of it.
Have you spoken with anyone from the Norwich Historical Society? You know that there is a Freedom Trail now for the Jail Hill area. Do you?
No, I haven't, and I would really like to.
Julie, will you point her in that direction of that? The brochure is online, the trail, and I believe that yes, there's even now a little video about.
I was going to say there's a virtual tour, Barbara. I'll send you the link, and we actually took the walk a few weeks ago as part of Harris Sisters Month. Fortunately, we got rained on halfway through, but it was so fascinating. And that's expanding also with some of the work that's been done in this community. So it's just an ongoing process. And like you said at the beginning, Barbara, we are so fortunate and blessed to live where we are, where we're surrounded by this incredible rich history. So thankful to the people in our community, like our local historical societies, who keep it alive. So excellent. Yeah. Okay, well, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. I'd like to thank all of you for being with us today. I would like to encourage all of you, if you have not had a chance, to please visit the Otis Library website at www.otislibrarynorwich.org and click on Harris Sisters Month. There's some great information on there if you'd like to learn more. And I'm just so grateful for all of you for being here. I'm grateful for Professor Tucker. Like I said, this video will be posted onto our YouTube page, hopefully in the next week. So if you know anyone who missed it, please encourage them to take a look at that. And thank you all, and all of you have a wonderful day.